So what we want to do is cultivate a capacity for kindness. So, close your eyes. Take a few moments to breathe in and breathe out. So what we want to do is cultivate a capacity for kindness. So, close your eyes. Take a few moments to breathe in and breathe out. Alrighty. Ooh. Let's do this instead. Welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. My name is Alok Kanoja. Just a reminder that although I'm a psychiatrist, nothing we discuss on stream is intended to be taken as medical advice. Everything is for entertainment or educational purposes only. If y'all have a concern or question, please go see a licensed professional. Medical concern or question, okay? Age of Empires music. I don't know. Hello, everybody. How y'all doing today? So welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. We've got some cool stuff to share with y'all today. So we're going to be going over our impact report for 2022 and show y'all what we've been up to here at HG. Couple other things that we're going to go over today. We're going to talk a little bit about our Right in the Feels event. So we are running an event in our community right now, which we'll talk about in a second, about helping people understand their emotions. And we also have a lecture today on alexithymia, as well as talking a little bit about taking responsibility and a couple of other things that are important for us. So I see Justin Masteller is saying, I'm feeling isolated and somewhat down, but more hopeful. Nice. It's okay. Our mood fluctuates, right? Thank you very much, sweet little cub. I really appreciate all the hard work you're doing. It's not just me. It's everyone here, including y'all. And, you know, we can work as hard as we want to, but if y'all don't put in some amount of work, it's not really worth very much, right? So what we really do is we're going to equip y'all with all the tools that y'all need to run the race, but the actual person who needs to do the running is you. Yeah, so I see a lot of people are talking about feelings. So we'll get to that in a second. Let's start with our impact report. Okay, so this is now live. So let's take a look. So this is our 2022 impact report, just sharing with y'all what we've been up to. And so we've got, comments and stuff. So Pax, just 1 year ago, I was talking with you about my struggles, and now I'm in a completely different place. You were one of the many people that helped me. So thank you, Pax. Hope you're doing great yourself. I'm currently watching every talk you have about ADHD. I'm 34 and getting assessed. Yeah, so Chill is saying, today I decided to finish my Healthy Gamer coaching, to finish and end my Healthy Gamer coaching. I'm at a point now where I'm very happy and content now and know exactly how I work. Awesome. Yeah, so those are some comments. So I just want to share with y'all kind of my thought about Healthy Gamer and where we are. So I don't know if y'all get this, but like I never set out to start or create what we have here today. Like this started out as kind of like a side project where I was going to vibe with some people, originally on Twitch and Discord. And this has grown so much beyond what I ever thought was possible. And like, what we've really managed to do here is try to tackle head on the mental health challenges of the digital generation. We started out focusing on like video game addiction. And I remember when I first prepared for my first stream, I had read 100 papers on neuroscience and technology addiction and video games and stuff like that. And then within like a month, I wasn't talking about that stuff at all. And what we really stumbled on is that when you actually talk to the internet, what you discover is that what the internet struggles with is so different from what clinicians are taught to believe, right? We think in terms of psychiatric diagnoses and neuroscience and stuff, and all that stuff is useful. We're going to be talking about it today. But what we really discovered here, and I think what we've built, is like a place where people can discuss their mental health and really move towards mental health. And the idea that mental health is more than mental illness. And I think that's not something that I really understood when I was training to become a psychiatrist. That's something that I've learned from this community. So we've had over 100,000 coaching sessions, average ratings of 4.7 out of 5 for one-on-one and 4.5 out of 5 from groups. So like, this is also where like we didn't really know that this was going to work, right? So back in 2019, I want to say, or 2020, we kind of set out and said, hey, we have this idea that we can create a peer support service to help people find purpose, motivation, improve their mental well-being. And like, people took a chance on us. We had our original beta set of cohort coaches, which were 8 people who were like, all right, I'll sign up for this random Dr. K thing. And since then, we've had over 10 cohorts, or we've had 10 cohorts of coaches. And, clients have signed up, and it seems like the data is strong. And just to keep in mind that, like, we're more than this, right? What we really are is community. So, Bagel is saying from YouTube, I swear every single one of your videos lately have been talking about the specific problem on my mind at the time. They've been most helpful, and I really appreciate these lectures particularly. Keep up the great work. And what I want to point out here is that the videos and lectures that we do actually come from y'all, right? They come from your questions, your interests, your posts, your concerns. And so, like, when y'all ask a question, it's kind of like this thing when we're in school and someone raises their hand and they ask a question that they think is a stupid question. It's always a good question to ask, because chances are there are a lot of other people in the room who have the same question. And so what's really amazing about this community is y'all have started raising your hands and saying, hey, this is a problem that I face. And as we dig into that, we end up helping literally like hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. We certainly know that on YouTube, for example, or not just YouTube, but across all of our platforms, we reach about 5 million unique people per month. And like, that's crazy. Like, we wouldn't be able to answer any of those questions unless y'all were asking them. So we can just look at like, Wizen Turtle. Really enjoying Healthy Gamers GG's course so far. On the one hand, a lot of psychology stuff I've picked up, but the completeness means that I'm also learning some medical and meditation stuff too, and it's all related to each other. That's exactly why we made courses. Didn't know if this would be help, but learned this concept from Healthy Gamer GG. Was in a bad place mental health-wise a couple months ago, and listening to his videos on YouTube and getting his self-coaching course really helped me. Awesome. So y'all are at the center of it. So we have 1 million subscribers on YouTube with over 100 million views, 21,000 posts on our subreddit, 25,000 attendees at community events, almost 8 million, I'm sure this is past 8 million at this point, messages on Discord. We've had over 500,000 plays on Dr. K's Guide to Mental Health and 282,000 hearts in Twitch chat. And we covered all kinds of things that y'all asked us to cover, right? We waded into the absolute mess of gender dynamics, meditation, spirituality, anxiety, gifted kids, and burnout. This is a prime example of things that go beyond the DSM and psychiatric diagnosis. I don't know that being a gifted kid is a psychiatric diagnosis, but does it lead to psychological challenges and negatively impact your mental health? Absolutely. And how do we help those people? If they go see a psychiatrist, they may get a diagnosis, and that could help. Don't get me wrong, especially if you've got something undiagnosed, it's really important to fix that. But at the same time, the mental health challenges that we face go beyond something as simple as mental illness. So we've also done work on dopamine detox and tech hygiene, sex ed. We taught y'all some stuff about sex. Like, what happens if I had sex and it was actually disgusting and I didn't enjoy it, which is actually a very common first experience. Talking to you all about sleep and substance use, dating and mental health, careers, depression, and even stuff like, how do I develop my personality? How do I discover who I am? Ton of fan art. I guess most of the fan art involves me in some way, but I like that this person has a character sheet. But it's not just me, right? It's what we represent. It's kind of who we have come to be. And so I love this. Like, we're more than just, helping people and Dr. K and this stuff. So we're also growing to tackle the mental health crisis. So like, a lot of what we've done over the last year is buff up other dimensions of what HE is. So this is our presentation at the American Psychiatric Association. So we had a poster there. We're doing 5 or 6 IRB approved studies right now. So on personal coaching, group coaching, creator coaching, career coaching, parent coaching. And so we're trying to see if sure, we can have, let's say, clients are satisfied, right? If we go up here, like, people are pretty satisfied, But just because they're satisfied doesn't necessarily mean we're helping them. And that's why we have this whole research arm where we can sort of demonstrate outcomes and present our outcomes and share with like the academic community like what we're actually doing. So the other thing is that we've also recognized that like just because Dr. K thinks something is a good idea doesn't necessarily mean it's a good idea. So we have a scientific advisory board, which we put together over the last year, an awesome group of people, psychologists, medical doctors, social workers, as well as coaches, right? So we've got lots of different people from different institutions in private practice, some people who are also influencers, like so Dr. Tracy is the truth doctor on TikTok. When we've got also folks like Dr. Comrade, who's clinical assistant professor of psychiatry at Maryland University in Tulane and is faculty at Johns Hopkins. So we've got a bunch of other people who are sort of like, when we have ideas, we're like, hey, is it okay to do coaching? We'll turn to our scientific advisory board and say, hey, what do y'all think about this? How do we make sure we're kind of like, delivering the best possible stuff? How do we organize our research studies? There's all kinds of stuff that our scientific advisory board is helping out with. We also have a ton of partnerships, and we've gone to various places and given talks. We consulted for the UN this year, also some stuff for Unity, like developers. We've had different kinds of sponsorships. So Opera was one of our sponsors. We presented at the American Psychiatric Association. We've given talks at Indeed. So we're even talking with educators like Educom about, okay, so if everyone's saying we need more, like we need to teach people about their emotions, but where is that going to happen? Does that mean that you need to go see a psychiatrist, or should we build it into an actual like educational curriculum? So we've talked with folks about, we've done mod trainings, right? So stress management and kind of like communication workshops for Discord mods and Reddit mods and things like that. And so we're collaborating with a lot of other people to try to make the world a better place. And it's awesome. Like we were even at TwitchCon last weekend, which was fantastic. So we also started the Healthy Gamer Foundation, and our first order of business at the Healthy Gamer Foundation was finding a board of directors who would provide appropriate oversight and make sure that the funds that we raise are being used properly. So these are people like Wayne Mackey, who's the one of the founders or co-founder of AIM Labs, DJ Wheat, Marcus Graham, who's from no longer at Twitch, but was at Twitch for a long, long time. Kevin Lin, one of the co-founders of Twitch, and then obviously myself and Kruti. And so we've raised about $200,000 so far. And our goals with this money is to identify scalable resources for young adult mental health, lead the industry to guide pro-social and anti-toxic behavior, and then develop modern mental health resources for communities and educational settings around the world. And so this is money that's being used, for research, advocacy, and grants. So we've also done a lot of work actually supporting our community, because we recognize that, for example, we've had coaching clients from 77 different countries, and we recognize that a lot of them have difficulty like affording our services. So we've supported 142 sessions from clients from Ukraine and Russia. We recognize that even our Russian clients aren't able to pay. We're not trying to advocate or support the war or anything like that. But what we're really noticing is that sometimes there are individuals in our community who get caught up in events that are far outside of their control and their responsibility. And we're there to help people try to maintain, some degree of positive motivation, find purpose, not fall into despair and things like that. We've done about 3,298 free coaching sessions and another 14,000 subsidized coaching sessions. So that's when we'll sort of offer discounts and stuff so that people can afford it. And then we've also expanded what our coaching offers. So like we launched a career coaching program this year, which was awesome. So this once again comes from like the needs of the community. So what we kind of realized is that we can talk about mental health stuff, but then there's a lot of stuff that is really about like developing emotional, social skills. We can talk about self-esteem, right? So here's how you build self-esteem. But what happens to someone who has low self-esteem in the workplace? How do they advocate for themselves? How do they get taken advantage of? right? So this is where what we've really appreciated is there's an intersection between some aspects of mental well-being and the outside world that are not diagnostic in any way, shape, or form. We're not talking about dependent personality disorder or like, an active mood disorder that makes you have very low self-attitude. We're talking about my self-esteem is kind of low. I have difficulty advocating for myself. I'm a people pleaser. And I feel like I'm a doormat at work. How can we help that person? So in our career coaching program, we partnered with Ethan Evans, who's a former VP at Amazon, senior VP at Amazon, was there for many, many years, launched all kinds of things like Amazon Prime Video, was very, very central to many of their products and services, and absolutely knows corporate culture and does executive coaching himself. And by kind of partnering with them, because like he knows how to get promoted at corporations, he knows what corporations are looking for. So we take that kind of business coaching expertise and then combine it with our model of understanding yourself first. And what we ended up with is, okay, let's understand how your ego or a humkar views yourself. What's your self-esteem? Where does that come from? What events have made you start to think about yourself this way? But then extend it into career-related stuff. So once we understand all that stuff, what we realized is that we weren't sort of equipping people to take the next step, which is, okay, now that we understand why you're a people pleaser, how do you go and have a conversation with your boss where you set limits around them? And that's where our coaches will literally role play the conversations. And what we'll do is, I love it. So what we'll do is like role play both ways. I mean, not all the time, but the coach decides what is kind of necessary or what the client is interested in. But what we'll kind of do is, okay, I'm going to role play you and you pretend to be your boss. And let's have a conversation, right? Where you're afraid that your boss is going to reject you. So I'm going to let's figure out what the language is going to be. Hey, so I just wanted to let you know, I'm really grateful for the opportunity working here. And I've kind of noticed that over the past couple of months, there's been more and more responsibility put on my plate. I'm just a little bit curious about how you're thinking about that. Right? So are you kind of you don't want to say hey, you should pay me more. You want to ask, hey, start with an open-ended question. What are you thinking about that? Have you noticed that too? Is this something that you expect to continue? And what should I expect? Right? So you can phrase the question in a very subtle way. What can I expect in terms of compensation for the increased workload? So that's a beautiful question, because it assumes a couple things. First of all, we're all agreeing that there's an increased workload. You're not demanding something, right? You're not saying I deserve this, maybe though even you do. You're trying to understand from your boss what to expect. Are they planning on paying you for this? Are they planning on giving you a promotion? Are they planning on giving you a raise? So it's kind of an open-ended, non-threatening question where you kind of signal things out. And these are the kinds of techniques that we've really found are very helpful. And what we tend to find is after 8 weeks of career coaching, there's a 25% increase in confidence in people's career trajectory, a 25% decrease in feelings of anxiety related to their job, and 35% decrease in feelings of depression related to their job. So it's not just about the feelings, it's also about developing confidence and advocating for yourself and things like that. So a couple of things that y'all have really, we've really noticed demand in the community for. So people have been asking us to do ADHD stuff. People are like, I have ADHD. How do I deal with attention, motivation, things like that? So we built this guide. It ended up being 40 plus videos. And I think it was basically the scripts for a guide were the length of a full nonfiction book. So we basically wrote a nonfiction book about ADHD and motivation, and then turned it into it's a guide, right? And so it's also like a choose your own adventure kind of format. So we talked about career coaching. We have specific groups that are built for students to help them kind of adjust to college. And unfortunately, we've got a lot left to do. So we've come a long way in 2022. I'm really proud of everything we've accomplished. I'm really grateful to the community. And what we're sort of recognizing is there's so much more left to do. We get requests to teach clinicians all the time, right? So I've scaled back on my clinical teaching a lot. So used to teach in various places. I'm doing one guest lecture at Berkeley next month. But generally speaking, I've cut way back on teaching at Harvard. cut way back on teaching in all different kinds of places. So now we're going to different places and teaching in different situations. We'll occasionally do guest lectures and stuff, like I said. But what we've realized is that clinicians need to understand a lot of what's evolving in digital mental health. They need to understand, like, I don't know how many clinicians know what an incel is, right? But I think clinicians need to understand that. I don't know how clinicians, generally speaking, are given a total of 0 hours on technology addiction. Can y'all believe that? 0 hours. So you don't need to teach about video game addiction, YouTube addiction, TikTok addiction, social media addiction at all to be to have an accredited program. So what we're recognizing is there are gaps in education for clinicians, as well as certifications for coaches. So our coaching program is now third-party accredited. So we took our coaching program and submitted, the whole curriculum to a third-party accreditation to verify, that it's like legit and stuff. So we kind of have that now. So we're also going to be offering a lot of educational stuff for coaches. And we're also developing the Coaches League, which is for skills development, community, and career resources for coaches. So a lot of our coaches have gone on to do other things, and they kind of want to stay connected to the community. And we're hoping that the Coaches League will sort of do that. And last but not least, thank y'all for supporting, contributing, and challenging us to make the best subclinical mental health resources on the internet. Because this is coming from y'all, right? So thank you very much for all of your help. So it's wild. Like, we're like a real thing now, chat. Seriously. I mean, do y'all understand that? Like, so a lot of this stuff, like, even when y'all donate and sub and whatever, we can meme about it. But I mean, that's how we pay for this stuff, right? Like, it really helps in terms of making contents, having some higher quality, like editing on YouTube videos, so concepts are more digestible. Like, all that stuff comes from y'all. Even the ideas and the needs come from y'all. And so that's how we know. How do we know? How can we keep up with the evolving mental health needs of the digital generation? It's through what y'all say. And as someone says, thanks for holding the space. Pocket says, I'm more than happy to hold the space. I love your characterization. I wonder if you're a mental health professional. Either that or you're one hell of an amateur. But like, that's really, I think this is someone who understands what I really am, which is I hold the space, but the work is not necessarily me. The work is so much more than me. Right? You're the sugar daddies. Lol. Okay, so something else cool to show y'all. We have more cool things, chat. All right. So we started our Right in the Fields event. So this is awesome. Another like community organizers in HG have been just knocking it out of the park. I don't know if this is like I'm preaching to the choir here and y'all have already like kind of plugged in, but Touchgrass was really awesome. Right in the Fields is off to a really strong start. So Right in the Fields is our community event for 6 weeks where we're going to teach y'all. I'm going to take a step back. Sorry. So maybe a month ago, we looked at a very popular Psychology Today article where there was a psychologist who was talking about how men are struggling in dating and what they need to do is become more emotionally available. I think the article was really useful in a lot of ways, made a lot of good points. But I think the challenge is you can say like, okay, like people need to be more emotionally available. My question is how? How? How do you learn to be emotionally available? Can you go sign up for emotional availability class? So this is what's going on right now. Everyone is saying the world needs to be a particular place, or Gen Z needs to stop being so entitled, or this quiet quitting is a problem, or men need to be emotionally available, or women need to lower their standards, or whatever. Like, people have all kinds of complaints about all kinds of stuff. My question and our question here at HG is how? How are we actually going to accomplish this stuff? And so as the emphasis on emotional awareness increases, we've got events like Right in the Fields, which Right in the Fields is all about helping you understand your emotions, raising awareness of emotions, hopefully helping you regulate your emotions so that you can kind of boost your EQ a little bit. So I'd love to share with y'all what we've discovered so far. So already within, I think, 1 week, we've had 4,000 people sign up for Right in the Feels. And they've tracked their emotions 5,000 times. So it's awesome. So people are already starting to track their emotions. And then we're also finding all kinds of cool stuff. Wait, where is... Here we go. So here is our Right in the Feels emotion tracking. I just wanted to share this with you all today. So the most common emotion that we feel in our community is actually happiness. Happiness wins, number one, which is something that you sometimes wouldn't get, right? You look sometimes at our community and it's like, oh man, like people are like struggling so much. But actually, this is what's cool, is like a lot of people are happy. A lot of people are building their lives and starting to be happy. It's like awesome that happiness is actually the number one winner. Now, there may be some kind of selection bias here, and this is something I encourage y'all to think about. For people who are participating in the event, I think there's a greater likelihood that those people will be happy. Now, we have to be careful here, because if I'm happy, does that mean I'm more likely to participate in stuff? Maybe. But I think there's another subtle association here, which is it's people who participate in stuff like this that actually improve their emotions. The likelihood to participate in activities that help you understand your emotional awareness, the kind of people who will sign up for this are the kinds of people who have done other stuff, because they're more likely to sign up. And as you do more stuff, you will become more happy. So out of the first 4,000 people, how many of them did touch grass? There's probably a really high overlap. And in fact, it's probably the people who did touch grass and really improved from it that are signing up for this too, because they're like, wow, that was so awesome. And so the key thing here is that I don't think that happiness necessarily makes you sign up, but the more likely you are to sign up for something and engage with something, the more likely you are to actually wind up being more happy. Right? So other stuff. So what is Right in the Feels? So it's a challenge to help you identify the emotions you struggle with and build emotional awareness over 6 weeks. And so what we're going to do is grow emotionally. So we're going to start by identifying simple emotions, identifying complex emotions, identifying obscure emotions, recognizing intensity, participate in emotional regulation, and do emotional reflection. Right? So this is how we're going to learn. And we're going to focus on 6 emotions over 6 weeks. Shame, fear, boredom, anger, sadness, and happiness. Hold on a second. Are you saying that boredom is an emotion? Huh. And of course, in order to encourage participation, we're going to bribe y'all, because that's what we have to do. So there are rewards, Discord events that we're going to be talking about. And so check it out. Isn't that cool? Chat? Y'all like that? Bribes, you say. Yes. Access to Dr. K's guide and some amount of merch, I believe, for the winner. Don't you love bribery? Absolutely. My boredom levels are probably 0 due to Twitch and YouTube existing. I would disagree. Because here's the thing. Twitch and YouTube alleviate boredom, but only in small doses. And on your 4th hour, 5th hour, 6th hour, 7th hour, we start to feel more bored. Right? So we have, to me, boredom is a feeling. What's the difference to an emotion? That's a great question. This is exactly why we have this event, right? We're going to start digging into that stuff. Vegal1337 says, none of this helps. Boy, do we have a post for you today. Y'all want a quick preview? I don't mean to. Anyway, no, we're not gonna do a preview. It'll be too mean. We'll get around to it. Okay. So, Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to tease. I was, because literally we're going to talk about sometimes people for whom nothing works. And so it was perfect, right? So like we've got it. But then I realized that what we're going to share today could be, what's the word? Is kind of like could be perceived as insulting or devaluing, and we don't want to do that. So, because I really don't think it is. It was just sort of memeing, but kind of like it would have been like a very slight attack, which we don't want to do. That's not right. So, and instead, what I end up with is a cliffhanger, which was not what I intended to do. Okay. So let's get this stuff ready. Okay. So today what we're going to talk about is alexithymia. So alexithymia is the inability to experience your internal emotional state. And what I kind of view this as is almost like an emotional color blindness. So a lot of times what we don't really realize, but a lot of our problems actually come from an inability to experience our internal emotional state. We're not really aware of what we're feeling on the inside. And there's actually a lot of science that shows that being unaware of what you're feeling can lead to all kinds of problems. So alexithymia has been associated with problems with motivation and finding direction and purpose in life. So if you're someone who kind of like is going through life, but you're not really sure, what's the point? Like, you don't know why you're on this earth. You don't really, like, you look around at other people and you see like, oh, these people are so motivated. Like they get up every day and they're striving for something. But I get up every day and it's just kind of like a haze, right? I don't know really why I'm here. I'm just sort of existing instead of living. And that's actually been tied to alexithymia. We also find that alexithymia is a common culprit in a lot of psychological problems. So leads to problems, or not leads to, but exacerbates problems like addiction. So people who are alexithymic are more prone to addiction. We'll even dive into a lot of my clinical experience with working with people with addiction, which I don't know if y'all have struggled with this yourself, or maybe you have a friend who will say, yeah, I was doing great. I was like sober for 6 months and then I don't know what happened. I just relapsed one day and it was out of the blue. But what you'll really discover when you work with those people is it really wasn't out of the blue. And what was actually going on is that there were slight emotional stressors that were building up over time, building up over time, building up over time. And there's really good neuroscience to support this. And then when those stressors got overwhelming, the person ended up relapsing. And remember that these people are colorblind to this, which is why they're not aware of it. They think everything is fine, even though problems are building in the background. And alexithymia is also a culprit for problems in relationships. So what we tend to find is that when we don't understand what we're feeling, it creates all kinds of stresses in relationships. We start to send mixed signals because someone asks us, hey, is it okay if I, go to this party without you? And you're like, yeah, it's fine, like whatever. And then you kind of feel resentful, but you don't know how to vocalize that resentment. You feel ashamed for feeling that resentment. And so as a result, it kind of sabotages your relationship because you said it was okay, but now you're punishing this person for something that you gave them permission for. So alexithymia has been associated with all these kinds of things. And what I'd love to do is dive into really what alexithymia is today, as well as a little bit about how it manifests in different dimensions in our lives. So let's take a look. Okay. Boop. Okay. So let's talk about alexithymia. Okay. So alexithymia is the inability to detect internal emotional state. Alexithymia has been associated with motivational problems. We've already said. Purpose. Has been associated with addictions and other mental health problems, right? And these are not just diagnosed addictions, but also like digital addictions like YouTube and TikTok and stuff like that. And then lastly, relationship problems. Now, here's why talking about alexithymia is important. A lot of people who struggle with these three things will go looking for answers for these three things, right? Does that make sense? We're looking for answers. So they'll say, how do I find purpose in life? And what people will do is give them answers about purpose. So we'll say like, oh, like go read inspiring things, or like go out and volunteer and go do this and go do this and go do this and go do this. And they don't realize that that what's really in the way is actually emotional color blindness. Because when you ask someone, like if I Google like, how do I find purpose in life? You're not going to see alexithymia or emotional color blindness come up. Does that make sense? How do I overcome addictions? You're not going to see alexithymia come up. I have problems in my relationship. I encourage y'all, go look at like, any kind of relationship advice situation. Like go look at like a subreddit or a forum or whatever. No one is going to say, hey, the problem with this relationship is that you're emotionally colorblind, right? What they're going to do is they're going to say, oh, like this person doesn't respect your boundaries, break up with them. And as it turns out, there's actually good scientific evidence that all of these things are influenced by alexithymia. So let's take a look at what are the components of alexithymia, okay? So number one is difficulty identifying feelings, okay? And now we're going to see, so number two is difficulty describing feelings to others. Right? Y'all see maybe how this can relate to relationship problems if I can't describe what I'm feeling? Number three is, y'all ready for this? This is going to be a KO, okay? Stimulus bound, externally oriented thinking style. Now you may say, what does this mean, Dr. K? This means that in order for you to be motivated to do something, there must be a stimulus from the outside that causes your motivation. An externally oriented thinking style means that you need external deadlines, pressure. These are both stimuli, right? Do y'all get that? In order to act. Now that's kind of interesting because this seems like a huge problem, right? I can't bring myself to do something until there's some kind of consequence or deadline. I'm like externally motivated. And it turns out that being externally motivated is correlated and is one of the features of being internally colorblind, which sort of makes sense, right? Because if I'm blind to my internal drivers, I'm going to need to rely on external deadlines and pressures and things like that in order to act. The last thing that's kind of interesting is a constricted imagination. And you may say, well, wait a second, what does imagination have to do with internal colorblindness? So there are studies that show that literally people who have alexithymia will have more logical and like less emotive dreams. So they'll have dreams that are like really kind of run-of-the-mill, kind of like emotionally bland kind of stuff. And what I've seen when I work with people who are alexithymic is I'll ask them one really important question. I'll ask them, where do you want to be in 5 years? And when I ask this, where do you want to be in 5 years question, people who are alexithymic are like, I have no idea. I can't even imagine it. They can very much vocalize, I don't like that I'm living at home. I don't like that I'm alone. I don't like. And they'll use these words like or don't like, right? They won't say, I'm ashamed of living at home. I feel pathetic about myself. They'll say, yeah, I don't want this. This needs to change. Needs to change. And then the problem that we get into is that, remember, they're stimulus bound. So even though it needs to change, if your parents aren't kicking you out of their basement, then you're never going to leave. And so they have difficulty imagining the future. And by the way, difficulty imagining the future leads to a lack of purpose. Because if we think about those people that we want to be like, right? who have purpose and are driven for something, can devote 20 years of their life to create a dream. But if you can't even imagine what the future would be like, how are you supposed to have visions to go towards? How are you supposed to find goals? And what we end up doing when we're alexithymic is, since we're not in touch with ourselves, what we end up doing is just looking at external sources for inspiration. So we end up with this kind of bland materialism where we look around and we're like, I don't really want this, but I guess it would be nice. I should move out of the house. I should get in shape. I should start eating healthy. I should start making more money. Because we look at all of these things, but we don't have this internal driver. We're stimulus bound. And so we just kind of look outside of ourselves and we're like, okay, I guess I should do that because that looks good. Okay? So these are the 4 features of alexithymia. And as we'll see, we're going to break down how these lead to these 3 common problems. So let's talk a little bit about the origins of alexithymia. So how does someone become alexithymic? So the first thing to understand is that alexithymia is more often found in men than in women. So there's even something called, I forget the exact, normative male alexithymia. So let's talk about normative male alexithymia for a second. So what do we mean by normative male alexithymia? What we mean is that researchers have sort of found that a certain amount of alexithymia is normal in men. And why is this? So if you look at how men are sort of culturally raised, we're really raised to express one emotion. So frustration or anger. That's really the only thing that you're allowed to feel as a man growing up. This is sort of changing now, thankfully. But I just saw a social media clip about, how men shouldn't cry from a conservative commentator. But so this is kind of normal, where we're sort of taught, if you think about a 13-year-old kid who's playing sports and they feel afraid to go to the big match. And when they feel fear, what are they taught? Or is that an acceptable emotion? No, fear is something that needs to be conquered. Fear is for the weak. And heaven forbid you feel ashamed, right? Because crying and feeling shame, those aren't acceptable emotions. Those are also emotions of weakness. What are the emotions that a strong man feels? A strong man feels anger, righteousness, right? And what I really find is that for a lot of men that I've worked with, and we'll get to women in a second because things are changing very rapidly, is that anger sort of forms an umbrella emotion. So I'll give you all kind of a simple example, okay? So let's say I get rejected by someone that I'm interested in. Let's assume a heteronormative relationship between a man and a woman. So when I feel rejected by someone, there are all kinds of things that normally come with rejection, right? So there could be fear that I'll be alone forever, shame at myself for being rejected, feelings of low self-worth. But is that what I say? Do I go to my friends and I say, hey, I asked this person out, they turned me down, and now I'm afraid that I don't have the basic qualities necessary for being in a relationship. I'm afraid of being alone for the rest of my life. I'm just really scared about what this means for my future. That's not how we talk, right? Instead, what you tend to see is what's a lot of considered toxic masculinity, which is oh yeah, she dumped me, screw her. And then my friends will also say, yeah, you deserve better, right? And that what they'll kind of do is they'll kind of ramp me up. And this isn't just true of men. This absolutely happens with women as well, where people will say, yeah, you dodged a bullet. Oh yeah, that person doesn't deserve you. And they'll take all those fears and shames and loneliness, and what they'll do is they'll replace them with anger. Screw that person. They'll get mad at this person for hurting you. And so it's very easy for anger to become the umbrella emotion. That's the thing that we're kind of normalized to feel. A couple of other considerations here is that, in my opinion, this is changing rapidly. And I've seen more women who are alexithymic in the last, if we look at when I started med school in 2010, I'd say the nature of alexithymia and the discrepancy between men and women is shrinking. So there's good evidence that a lot of women are alexithymic as well. So for example, if we look at anorexia nervosa, so this is a diagnosis that predominantly affects women. 63% of people with anorexia nervosa will be alexithymic. Okay? 50% of people with major depressive disorder will be alexithymic. About probably less than 10% of the population is severely alexithymic, which is pretty big, right? And then like probably, up to 30 to 50% of the population is moderately or mildly alexithymic. I'm not entirely sure about that number. And so what we're seeing is that this is probably changing rapidly. Why is it changing rapidly? So the first is that there's some good news, which is that men are getting more in touch with their emotions. That's something that, we try to do here and other people are trying to do as well. I think women especially are starting to recognize that men have difficulty with emotions. So thank you for y'all's support. The other thing that's happening with alexithymia is increasing technology use. And this isn't gender specific. And what we see with increasing technology use is that using any kind of social media or video game suppresses our emotional circuitry, like the limbic system. So this is like the amygdala, to a certain degree, the hippocampus, a couple of other areas. And so what happens is if we spend 8 hours a day using technology, those are 8 hours of the day where our emotional circuitry is being suppressed. And as our emotional circuitry enters this chronic state of suppression, and more importantly, as it gets suppressed during periods of critical development. So if I'm a teenager and I feel really bad about myself, normally so a lot of teenagers feel bad about themselves, and to a certain degree, we can't escape those feelings. So we are, by definition, forced to deal with them, right? So I'm moping around the house. My parents notice something is wrong. They try to talk to me about it. I reject them. I go hang out with my friends. This is kind of when I was growing up, when I was a teenager, like back in the 90s, right? And there was a certain amount of emotions I couldn't escape from. I started falling into a video game addiction because that's when I started to escape from my emotions. And now what we're seeing is a generation of kids who have a very, very, very easy escape from their emotions. And as we have escapes from our emotions, we don't develop them. We don't develop our internal understanding of them. So as technology use is increasing, we're seeing that normative male alexithymia is starting to actually get balanced out. And I think a lot of women, I'd say women now are more alexithymic compared to men. I'm not saying they're more than men, but the gap seems to be shrinking with technology use. Okay? So the internet is essentially dulling our emotions. So as our emotions get dulled, what kind of problems does this create? So the first is, let's talk about purpose and motivation. So let me ask y'all a question. How do you find purpose in life, right? So how do you find it? Do you go outside walking down the street and then you find it? Do you Google your way to an answer? Do you randomly go and volunteer until you discover purpose in your life? That doesn't really work, right? So I don't know how to say this, but purpose comes from inspiration. And what do we mean by purpose comes from inspiration? It's kind of like if you find my purpose doesn't come from outside of me. It comes from within me. And what I've seen more and more in our society is that when people have difficulty finding purpose, what I tend to see is that their internal voice has been squashed. So I'll see this a lot with controlling parents, for example. So parents who will say I don't care what you want, you need to do what I tell you to do. We see a lot of gifted kids who struggle with finding purpose. And I think one of the middle connecting pieces is actually alexithymia. Because these are kids whose potential was realized, right? Or noticed by their parents. And so their parents were like, oh, you're too smart to do ABC. Forget what your internal voice is. I don't want you to spend time in art class. I want you to go, be an entrepreneur tech genius at the age of 19. And so a lot of times what we're seeing is that people have difficulty finding purpose because those internal voices were squashed by controlling parents. We also tend to find that people who have difficulty finding purpose were also neglected or dealt with some kind of abuse or had early childhood experiences or poor attachment formation. So remember that attachment is how we form human relationships. And the attachment theory also teaches us, or attachment is how we learn what we feel on the inside. So a child early on doesn't know what they're feeling, right? So if I'm an 18-month-old and I'm walking around and I stumble and fall, do I feel hurt? Should I panic or should I laugh? And if you look at an 18-year-old who stumbles and falls, the first thing that they're going to do is look to the adults in the room. And if the adults in the room are terrified, oh my God, little Timmy fell down. Then the child starts crying. He's like, oh crap, I should be worried right now. Everyone else is worried. And so then a child learns they learn to recognize their feelings by looking at the faces of others. Similarly, if that same child turns to everyone else and everyone else starts laughing, then the child will start laughing too, and they'll be like, oh, this is funny. And so what ends up happening is if we grow up in neglectful households, so we're not talking necessarily about abuse, but even if you have a single parent household who works 2 jobs and they're not around to reflect your emotions back to you, what we discover is that these kids grow up to be alexithymic. And as they grow to be alexithymic, they struggle because they don't know how to look into themselves. And as they don't know how to look into themselves, they can't find purpose. And what they end up doing is looking outside of themselves for some kind of compass or goal to move towards. I have no idea what I want in my life. If you ask me, so now we can kind of go back to some of our data, right? So if we kind of go back to this, if you ask me what I want, I have constricted imagination. I have no idea what I want. What I want is to have purpose. What I want is to no longer live this life. I want this life to change. That's what they want. This is also where you see people who are externally motivated. And why are they externally motivated? Because they're colorblind to themselves. Because remember, what is the relationship between emotion and motivation? If we want to understand this, go watch a movie. Any movie. Doesn't matter what the movie is. When there's a protagonist, hero or heroine, what motivates them to overcome, to triumph against adversity? Dig really deep and beat that final boss. Is it logic? When the hero is losing or heroine is losing, and that critical period comes, do they go to the library and do the next 4 hours of the movie show them doing exhaustive research and logical mathematical proofs to discover the solution? And then they hand a treatise about how the villain is being a bad person to them that is logically perfect. And then they show that the villain is flipping through the pages and then realizes logically I am defeated, and then the movie ends. No, never. You never see people furiously reading things on Wikipedia and listening to podcasts in order to triumph over adversity and find motivation to keep going. Right? What do you see? Emotions. And if you think about the periods of your life where you've been the most motivated, chances are emotions have something to do with it. All those moments of life where you're like, never again. I'm never going to be in this situation again. Or you feel inspired to create, right? Is that like logically you're like, oh, I guess I should do this? No, you feel inspiration. And how are you supposed to feel inspiration if you're emotionally colorblind? There's a lot of good evidence to support this as well. So we know that the amygdala, which is our fear center, is really good at putting the brakes on our frontal lobes. It can just shut them straight off. So our frontal lobes are responsible for our executive function, which is planning and executing tasks. So we can wake up this morning and say, okay, I've got this to-do list and I've got 14 things to do. And our amygdala is like, yeah, we're afraid of leaving the house. We're not going to do that today. And you're like, all right, well, I guess I'm not going to do anything today. But you don't realize it because now the problem with alexithymia is you're blind to this component. So what do these people actually experience? They experience amotivation. I'm just not motivated to do anything. They don't see the emotions holding them back. Because what keeps us from acting? Negative emotions. Fear of shame, fear of rejection, fear. Right? So purpose and motivation are absolutely tied to alexithymia. Next up, let's talk about addictions. So there's evidence that shows that people who relapse are emotionally unaware. So if you look at when people use, the more that someone is able to identify what they are feeling in the moment, the less likely they are to use a substance. So for example, this is why AA uses call your sponsor if you're struggling, right? Let's think about that. Why should you call your sponsor if you're struggling? When you call your sponsor, first of all, let's understand what struggling means. What is the experience of struggling? Feeling negative emotions. Why don't we say call your sponsor if you're feeling negative emotions? Why do we use the word struggling? Because we're alexithymic and we don't even know what these are. So all we experience is the struggle. Do y'all see that? Our experience of it is just that life is hard because we don't even know that struggling is not a real thing. It's an umbrella term. Y'all see that? What is struggle? What does it mean to struggle? Things are hard. Well, what does that mean? Things are hard. It's hard for me to do something. Well, okay, what makes it hard? Well, I'm terrified of asking my boss for a raise because I don't want to be perceived as greedy. Okay, now we see that there's potential for shame. Now we see that there's fear. Now we see that there's anxiety. But what we do when we're alexithymic is we just say, I'm struggling. I'm struggling, bruh. Bruh, I'm struggling. Okay? And I've seen this clinically a lot where I'll like work with people and I'll ask them, I'll be like, hey, so like, you were sober for 6 months. What happened? They'll say, I don't know what happened. I just relapsed. It just happened. I was good one day and then suddenly I wasn't good. It just happened. And the more that I tunnel down with those people, I don't know if y'all have friends who have struggled with addiction or you yourself have struggled with addiction. And I don't know how to say this, but like if RNG is responsible for whether you stay sober or not, like that's not a winning strategy, right? Because when someone says it just happened, that's RNG. There's nothing you can do. Like if it just happened, what can you do to overcome it? You can't do anything. Oh, I guess just in the future, just make sure it doesn't happen again. Well, how? So the more that I work with those people, what we actually tunnel down into is it didn't just happen. There was a slow burn of negative emotion that reached a certain tipping point, was overwhelming, and you didn't know how to cope. Because here's the common element of all addictions. What is the one thing that unifies all addictions? Emotional coping. The one thing, right? So whether I'm shooting up heroin or I'm addicted to shopping, what they do is manipulate my emotions. So any substance will kind of mellow you out or maybe activate you, right? Help you feel good. Sometimes that's euphoria. But other kinds of behavioral addictions like technology addictions, they dull our emotional circuitry. And so as we dull our emotional circuitry, this is really important to understand. It doesn't make the emotions go away. We just lose sight of it. And as we lose sight of it, it starts to act in other dimensions of our life. It always seeps out. That emotional energy is there in the brain. It just affects different parts of our brain in different ways. Just because I am unaware of the activity of amygdala does not mean that the amygdala does not interfere with my frontal lobes. Doesn't mean that I don't feel fear and it keeps me trapped at home, right? So the effects on the brain are absolutely there. We just aren't aware of them. So what we see with alexithymia is that people who are addicted, there's actually excellent research on this by Dr. Volkow, I don't know how to pronounce it, but she's an awesome neuroscientist who talks about the neurobiology of addiction. And she actually has isolated that there are like particular emotional circuits in the brain that as we raise awareness of our emotions, or we look at people how are the brains of people who are addicted different from the brains of people who aren't? And there's one of the major one of the major differences is that people who are vulnerable to addiction have a lower level of emotional awareness. And literally their brains are wired in a different way. So what we tend to find is that people who are not aware of their emotions can't manage them. So this is where, like, here's the tricky thing. So if I'm not aware that my negative emotions are building up, how am I supposed to healthily cope with them? Right? Because the goal of overcoming an addiction is you have to develop healthy coping mechanisms. Fantastic. Let's develop healthy coping mechanisms. Let's meditate. But if I'm not even aware that I'm feeling anxious, like, I'm not even going to bother to meditate. Does that make sense? So in order to develop healthy coping mechanisms, we have to know when we need to cope in a healthy manner. And if we're alexithymic, we don't even realize it. So let's move on. Let's talk about relationships. Now we get into some real problems. Okay? So here's what we tend to find in people who are alexithymic and what their relationships look like. Oftentimes, they are cold and distant when it comes to communication. So in their relationships, they like feel distant. So this is what we would call emotional unavailability. I'm looking for someone who's emotionally available. That's someone who is not cold and distant. Let's think about what the opposite is, right? So warm and present. This equals emotional availability. And I want y'all to think a little bit about, okay, if you're cold and distant in a relationship, think about your parents, right? Were your parents warm and present, or were they cold and distant? A second feature, if you look at the science of alexithymia and look at, if you take people who are alexithymic and look at what other communication patterns do you see, the other thing, y'all are going to love this, social, non-assertive communication. Okay? So sometimes this is social anxiety, or we call this social anxiety. I'm not saying that they have a social anxiety disorder. What I'm saying is that people who are socially non-assertive with communication have difficulty walking up to someone and initiating a conversation. They have difficulty advocating for themselves, right? They're non-assertive in their communication style, so they're passive. So this is the person who will go to a party and will stand there in the corner and wait for someone to talk to them. And we call that social anxiety. But this is actually associated with alexithymia. Okay? Next thing, this is the beta mindset. Right? So I'm going to draw a pretty broad correlation here. I'm not saying that this is real, but what I'm saying is if you listen to people who talk about being betas or get called betas, they're non-assertive communicators. Right? So they're people who will like have lots of feelings, but then like won't go and ask someone out. So I think, I know it sounds kind of weird, but I think a lot of like people like this, you don't have to go and take the red pill and become an ultra chat or things like that. What you actually just need to do is be aware of what your internal emotional state is. And as you become more aware of your internal emotional state, you can start to be more assertive in communication. And this is where if you look at some of like this community, right, they're all about assertive communication. I think sometimes their assertiveness crosses the bridge into toxicity and being harmful. But I think that like this is the kind of interesting thing about that community is I think they've stumbled on a lot of good stuff, but I think their underlying mechanisms are not scientifically based. Because what you actually discover is that as you become less alexithymic, we're not saying that you need to be a better person. You just need to be aware of what you're feeling on the inside. And as you become aware of what you're feeling on the inside, you can start to communicate more assertively. So this is also, there's some really interesting data here to understand about relationships, which is that if you look at men will oftentimes be reluctant to engage in couples counseling. There's research on this. And if you ask men, why don't you want to go to couples therapy, or why are men resistant to couples therapy? What it actually comes down to is that men feel like they are at a disadvantage in terms of participating in couples therapy. And why is that? It's because they don't know how to describe, remember, they can't describe their feelings to other people. And so what happens is they go into couples therapy and then they have a partner who's very emotionally descriptive, and then they feel like their partner does such a better job at explaining themselves that the therapist takes their side. And then when the therapist asks, okay, what's your experience of this? The dude is like, I don't know. Right? So men actually feel like they're at a disadvantage when it comes to therapy. Now, I'm not saying that men are at a disadvantage. That's a really, really important thing to consider. So when I work with men, for example, in couples therapy, what I oftentimes find is that if I have an alexithymic patient, man or a woman, right? Because a lot of women can be alexithymic too. It's my job as the couples therapist to translate this into I'm afraid, I'm ashamed, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think that men are actually at a disadvantage in couples therapy, for the record. They just feel that way, which leads to their reluctance to engage. And then let's try to think through. So if you can't communicate your emotions, if you don't know what you feel and you can't communicate emotions, what happens in a relationship when you can't communicate your emotions? Well, this is where things get hard. Because what happens is we get into arguments. And we get into arguments that are very confusing because the stated reasons that we have don't actually match what we feel. So I'll give you all an example. So I was once working with a young man who got into a conflict with their significant other. And he was concerned because she had a couple of conferences and business trips lined up where there were male colleagues that she would go with, right? So it was like a group of people from their job. So it wasn't just like one woman and one man. But this guy was really, really concerned. And he was like, yeah, like, men just want one thing. And his partner would say like, oh, these are just like they're friends of mine from work. I'm not romantically interested in them at all. They're not romantically interested in me at all. We're just friends. So there's nothing for you to worry about. And then the man responds with, well, like, that's just not true. All men just want one thing. They're just biding their time. Like, I don't want you to go. Like, I don't think it's good. You don't understand them. And so there's this kind of paranoia that started to come out. And sometimes would really result in controlling behavior, right? So there's paranoia and controlling behavior because they're like, you don't understand men, right? I understand men. You're in danger. I don't want you hanging out with them. I don't want you hanging out with them. When really what's underneath is fear, right? So the man isn't able to articulate, I feel insecure. I'm afraid that I love you so much and I think you're such an amazing person and I have self-esteem problems. I don't think I deserve you. I think you deserve someone way better than me. And so what I'm afraid of is that at some point, if you spend time with other men who are better than I am because I have self-esteem issues, eventually you will realize that you can do better than me. And since I love you and since I care about this relationship, I don't ever want that to happen. I don't ever want to lose you. Do you deserve better? Yes. But do I want to hang on to you? Absolutely. And so now what happens is unless the man is able to vocalize that, because by the way, what kind of shameful crap is that? Like who says like who says that kind of thing? How is that Chad at all? Like that's the most beta stuff you could say, by the way, right? Which is why we suppress those kinds of thoughts growing up. And then we don't know how to articulate them. And now we see how this leads to conflict in a relationship. Because now the discussion is, are all men trying to get into your pants? No, they're not. And you guys are arguing up here. And then there's no resolution. Because y'all are each trying to convince each other where the real problem is I feel insecure. I'm afraid that you're going to leave me. And then the worst part of this situation is because that's the root problem that leads to the paranoia and the controlling behavior. Eventually, what ends up happening to this person's previous girlfriends? They end up leaving because he's so controlling. Right? And you take that to the internet and people are like, oh my God, that guy is so controlling. Dump him and move on. And then like Now what's happened? Now the person has been further traumatized. Oh my God, my self-esteem is so much. I really didn't deserve that. People have been leaving me over and over and over again. Now I really, like, any decent person deserves better than me. And so then the whole cycle repeats. And what does it come down to? Alexithymia. It comes down to inability to understand what you're feeling, inability to admit to yourself that you're insecure, and sure as hell ain't gonna communicate that to this person that I'm afraid of leaving. And so I sabotage myself, I shoot myself in the foot, and we result in a situation where you can't communicate with your partner and you end up driving them away. Because the actual problem in the relationship cannot be discussed or addressed. And instead, y'all end up having 9 rounds on whether all men are trying to get into your pants or not. So a lot of what we see as controlling behavior actually comes from inability to understand and articulate your own feelings. Now, in this example, we sort of use the situation of a man dating a woman. I've absolutely seen it the other way as well, right? Where a lot of controlling behavior actually comes out of insecurity. And so it's not necessarily men to women, just in that direction. So what we end up seeing is that alexithymia causes all kinds of problems. And when you go look at relationship advice stuff, they're not going to say, oh yeah, the problem here is that you're emotionally colorblind. What people will say is communicate. But communicate what? Right? People say communication is the foundation of a healthy relationship. But what to communicate? What should I say in communication? What you should say is be aware of your feelings and communicate your feelings, your drives, your desires to your partner. And so I think that alexithymia is a really, really common and growing problem. We know that less than 10% of the population, up to 10% of the population, has severe alexithymia. But we also see that there are high correlations of alexithymia with all kinds of other problems. 63% of people with anorexia nervosa have alexithymia. We also know that to a certain degree, there is normative male alexithymia. So there's a certain amount of the way that all men are raised, which leads to a certain degree of alexithymia, which is sort of really allowing us to feel only one emotion. And as we feel predominantly anger, we lose sight and don't know how to detect these other emotions. As we lose sight of those emotions, which, by the way, technology is making alexithymia worse across the board, because the universal effect of technology is to numb our emotional circuitry, and especially our negative emotional circuitry. So as we have a generation of people who are becoming more internally numb, it creates all kinds of problems that we see front and center. The first is purpose and motivation. I'm so burnt out at work. Well, why are you burnt out at work? Well, I took this job. Well, why did you take the job? It's because I had a quiet voice deep inside me that told me that I really want to do this. And that voice was first squashed by my parents. And then I internalized that dialogue and took all of my hopes and dreams and throttled them. And then I ended up picking a job for prestige. And now I call it quiet quitting. It starts with alexithymia. So we struggle to find purpose. We also know from lots of research that people who are alexithymic have difficulty with their imagination, especially around the future. We also see a lot of problems that we see with motivation, which is that a lot of people will say, oh, I'm externally motivated. I can't do anything unless there's a deadline. And this is literally associated with alexithymia. It's one of the key 4 features of alexithymia, is to be externally oriented thinking and stimulus bound, which means that you don't act unless there's an external thing that is pushing you to act. And let's think about that for a second. Well, why is that? Well, it's because you've spent the first 20 years of your life turning down the volume on the internal stuff, which results in alexithymia. I don't know what I'm feeling on the inside. And so what are the only things that I'm left to motivate myself with are things from the outside. We also see other consequences of this, such as a vulnerability towards addiction or worsening of addicting behaviors. There are high correlations between alexithymia and all kinds of mental diagnoses. So very high correlation with autism spectrum disorders, 63% of anorexia, which we talked about 45% of binge eating disorders, a lot of addictive behaviors, up to maybe 50% of people with major depressive disorder will be alexithymic as well. And so what we're starting to see is that when people get addicted, what is the purpose of an addiction? The purpose of an addiction is emotional coping. That's the one uniform thing between all addictions. They help us manage our emotions. And if I'm colorblind to what I am feeling, I cannot develop a healthy coping mechanism because I don't even know that my trash can is 50% full. The only time I notice it is when it's overflowing, because that's when it starts to create problems in my life. And that's when I end up relapsing. The third big dimension that alexithymia causes problems is within relationships. Because remember, the second core feature of alexithymia is difficulty describing your emotional state to others. And when I can't articulate how I feel in a relationship, I'm sort of at a disadvantage in terms of communication. And then I don't know how to tell my partner how I feel, or even friends, right? Where like your friends didn't invite you to a party. And then like, just imagine this for a second, like they didn't invite you to a party and you feel hurt and left out. Do you actually go to them and say, hey, it was really hurtful to me that y'all left me out. I feel neglected and I feel undervalued compared to other friends in our friend group. Does anyone talk like that? Maybe increasingly. But generally speaking, what people will say is there'll be some kind of like weird passive aggressive exchange, right? I'll be mad at you and be like, hey, by the way, I'm around in the future. I'm around. You don't know how to say that to people. Or when you do say it, because the other person is alexithymic and you say, hey, I feel undervalued compared to other people, that makes your friend feel ashamed, but they don't realize that they feel ashamed. And so what they end up doing is getting mad at you, right? Because they're alexithymic too, and all they know how to feel is anger. So that shame turns into anger. And they're like, all right, bro, whatever, you're a loser, I'm out. And that's what the first person is afraid of, that they're going to have a negative reaction. So now I can't even articulate my feelings because you've got two alexithymic people, which explains so many online relationships where we can't communicate our needs to other people, right? When you say, hey, I feel neglected and undervalued as part of the group. And if your friend is not alexithymic, they'll recognize, oh, I feel bad. I'm sorry about that. It's really hard for me to hear that. Especially because I've tried to invite you 3 or 4 times. And I feel like I actually value you more than other people in the relationship. Here's my perspective. That the last 3 times I've invited you, you've declined or you haven't shown up. And the reason that I didn't invite you isn't because I value you less. It's because I feel rejected when I invite you to things and you don't show up. I start to wonder, is there something wrong with me that this person doesn't want to hang out with me? And then y'all like have a conversation about it. But if we're alexithymic on either side, let alone both, it's going to sabotage our relationship. So we tend to see that alexithymia causes problems in all 3 of these dimensions. And the real challenge is that unless we're aware that alexithymia is even a thing, we go on Google searching answers for each of these problems. How do I get my friends to invite me to things? That's a very common problem. No one is out there saying become more emotionally aware. Right? When there's actually strong data that suggests that alexithymia is associated with all this. So hopefully this quick foray into like kind of alexithymia 101 is illustrative, helps you all understand a little bit about what's going on. The good news is that alexithymia is not set in stone. So there's some evidence that it kind of gets classified as a personality trait, but I've seen overwhelming clinical success in terms of like teaching people about their emotions. So even when it comes to addiction, I developed a meditation program for people who had addictions at McLean Hospital, where the focus of the meditation program was internal emotional awareness. Because I saw this sort of neuroscientific deficit, and we picked all of the meditations that will help people become emotionally aware. And what did we see? As we started teaching people emotional awareness meditations, they started relapsing less. But for a brief period of time, they started feeling worse. They started acknowledging their negative emotions earlier, but then they could reach out for help. So it made them feel a little bit emotionally worse in the short term, reduced relapses over the long term, and overall improved their mental health 1 year out. So the good news is that there is stuff that you can do about this. You just have to really understand that emotional awareness is a really, really key component, because it's like literally chunks of our brain are all devoted to our emotions. And if we don't really understand what those are, how to regulate them, it's going to cause all kinds of problems in our life. Questions? Okay, so a couple of good questions. One is, how do you measure emotions and awareness of emotions? So there are a lot of different ways. So we've developed an EQ instrument, which we're trying to validate and seeing if it's valid. So we've developed our own because it has like different dimensions that we think are more relevant than some of the standard ones. But there are alexithymia scales that you can use. Dr. K is watching countless hours of motivational videos, watching Sigma male memes, and listening to motivating music, sign of alexithymia. I think it just depends on what you're feeling, right? So you can enjoy it, but are you aware of your internal emotional state? Can you be, this is a great question. Janaya Renee is saying, can you be emotionally volatile but alexithymic? Absolutely. In fact, oftentimes the people who are the most emotionally volatile are alexithymic. So let's think about that because it may seem like a paradox. Remember that so here's the key thing that people miss about alexithymia. Alexithymia is not the absence of emotions. It's the unawareness of emotions. So this is what a lot of people can get confused about when they're like, I am a robot. I don't feel anything. Just because you feel it does not mean that those parts of your brain are inactive. They're actually still active. They just manifest in different ways. They manifest as boredom. They manifest as a lack of motivation. They manifest as sitting at home all day and not feeling like going out. Because if you think about it, the human body and brain and being has a natural tendency to like seek things like connections and variety and stimulation. And if those things aren't active within you, if there's like, it's naturally like, if you look at a kid is like excited about life. They always want to stay up later, right? And there's a very natural tendency of human beings to seek out enjoyment and pleasure. And when we are numb to our internal emotional state, what we end up with is volatile emotional expression. Because remember, I don't recognize that the trash can is 50% full, so I never take it out. The only time I see emotions is when they're overflowing, because I can't handle them before then. So emotional volatility and alexithymia are very, very, very common, actually. And that's what we kind of see, right? I'm a gamer, and I don't really feel much. I don't really do much. But boy, can I tilt like a mofo. Boy, if you just like push my buttons the wrong way, I will destroy you on the internet with the logic of my arguments. And I'm going to get like, I just can't let it slip. I'm going to tilt. I'm going to be toxic to people on voice chat. I'm going to throw temper tantrums with my parents. I'm going to punch walls. I'm going to feel completely amotivated. All signs of emotional volatility. Great question. What if I mostly know my feelings and have the perfect thing to say in my head, but just can't say it? There could be a lot going on there, but this is also very common with alexithymia, where sometimes there are emotions there that people are not aware of. So if you have some kind of difficulty with speaking, chances are there's an emotion that you haven't found. So everyone's saying how to learn. Where do you start? What now? So this is the challenge. So if y'all have seen the ADHD guide, we've made tons of videos about ADHD. And then people are like, what now? Actually making change takes time and effort, and that's what's in the guide to ADHD. There's some stuff in there about emotions as well. We dig a lot into emotions and resistance. But this is why we have tons of solutions for y'all. We've taught meditations around emotion. We do streams around emotion. We also have coaching. So it's our belief that the medium or the mechanism of coaching that creates change and improvement in people's life is actually by boosting EQ. This is literally why we have the Right in the Feels event. So I'd say sign up for Right in the Feels. So it depends on what you're interested in. What do you do? At the minimum, you can just do emotion-related meditations. If you want to bump up one level, sign up for Right in the Feels. If you're more committed to making change, check out the ADHD guide. And if you're even more committed and want someone's help to specifically figure out, okay, what are my motivational challenges? What am I feeling? How do I develop a plan to improve my life? Then sign up for coaching. And it's just simple. It's like, it's not like I can say, okay, this is what you do. So what we've discovered here at HG is depending on how committed you are to making a change and what kind of investment you want, we've got different options for you. Minimal investment, I just want to try something. I want to spend 15 minutes 3 times a week, then meditate. Okay, I'm interested in journaling and learning more about my emotions, and I want a 6-week program that will hopefully help me understand more about myself and my emotions, then join up with Right in the Feels. Okay, I actually want an in-depth, choose your own adventure kind of thing that has a lot of different stuff, and I want to understand the neuroscience. I want to do worksheets. I want tailored meditations, then do Dr. K's guide. And this is so important to me that I'm willing to work with a human being for 12 weeks to try to figure this out, figure out my emotions, figure out how they intersect with my challenges in life, and then develop plans to not only manage my emotions, but achieve my goals, then do coaching. Is it possible that alexithymia is a result of antidepressant and anxiety medication since they focus on blocking out emotional pain? Can this be reversed? That's the weird girl is asking. So fantastic question. Let's understand a couple things. The first is that the point of antidepressant and anxiety medications is not blocking out emotional pain. So in the benzodiazepine class, that could be the case, but generally speaking, most antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications are not emotion blockers. That's what most drugs of abuse are. So benzodiazepines can be drugs of abuse, and the reason they can be drugs of abuse, the reason they can be addicting is because they block out pain. So I wouldn't agree with the premise that the goal of most antidepressant and anti-anxiety medication is to block out emotional pain. That being said, benzos being the exception. That being said, it is a common side effect of many antidepressant and anti-anxiety medications to numb people out or make them feel like a sandwich range of emotions. That's not really what they're designed for, but it is actually quite a common side effect. So if you are experiencing that side effect, I would definitely talk to your provider, because when people tell me that they experience that, I don't like that medication for them. The goal of an antidepressant or anti-anxiety medication is to remove the burden of excessive sadness or anxiety. It is not to free them from. I want my patients who have a mood disorder to be able to experience a normal level of sadness and grief. Like if their parent passes them away, I want them to be sad. That's a normal, healthy reaction to a loss. We don't want to numb people out with psychiatric medication. What we want to do is balance the range of like normal and bring them back into like a normal human range, right? Because when people are depressed or have an anxiety disorder or a depressive episode or an anxiety disorder, they're outside of the normal human range. And that's really the goal, is to bring them back in. Great question. And can it be reversed? Generally speaking, yes. So most of the time, if you stop the medication, the full emotional range will return. So Black Magic is saying, I've suffered from alexithymia for over 5 years. I'm scared that I'll never get back how I used to feel. And I'm so unmotivated that I'm starting to no longer think I can get better. That's also really common, where people will start to lose hope or motivation, right? So if we look at our alexithymia lecture, there's a lot that's going on here. One is a lack of imagination. So this person is sort of envisioning just one scenario, right? So I'm not saying like, oh, like you lack, like, I'm not saying it's like, I'm saying like this is a sign of the alexithymia. A sign of the alexithymia is that we have difficulty imagining other scenarios. Another thing to consider is that oftentimes the reason that people stay alexithymic is because in order to feel the good emotions, to get to the good emotions, we usually have to get through a lot of bad emotions. So the reason that we persist in alexithymia is because the first thing that we're going to find is going to be bad emotion, bad emotion, bad emotion. We have to dig through those bad emotions before we start uncovering inspiration. And so the key thing to remember is if you want to become less alexithymic, chances are you're going to have to face negative emotions before you face positive emotions. And that's why, especially like working with a professional can really, really help, like a therapist, if that's your situation. Okay. We got other stuff. Let's see. I'm just catching up with chat. I'm not. I see people are asking about Robert Plutchik's research. I don't. I may have. I don't know if I'm. I'm not familiar with the name. So if it's emotion wheel stuff, I think emotion wheel is pretty good. But there's a lot of variants of that, so I'm not sure. I mean, when people are saying just meditate, easy solutions, like, so we've got that. That's the whole thing, is we've got a ton of other solutions. Hold on a second, chat. It's just getting too bright in here. That is better. I mean, so that's meditation works well, but it's not the only way, right? So if y'all struggle to meditate, because that can be pretty hard, then I'd do one of the other things we suggested. Yeah, so all these questions, like, so this is why we're doing this lecture now. So I see people asking, journaling helps. If so, how do you go about it? How does it work? How can I identify emotions if I only understand them in an intellectual way? So we are doing this lecture now as opposed to 6 months ago or 6 months in the future, because we've got a bunch of stuff lined up to help y'all with this, right? So part of the Right in the Fields event is journaling. Like, we're going to journal. You're going to reflect on your journals. There's all kinds of stuff we have lined up. Can alexithymia be due to weight? Is there any correlation between weight and alexithymia? Not that I'm aware of, but as I mentioned before, alexithymia can definitely be associated with eating disorders. What's the opposite of spectrum of alexithymia? Too detailed emotional perception. That's a good question. I know that there are cases of emotional volatility, and some people will experience emotions very, very strongly. So some people are like empaths, where they can even feel the emotions of other people. And so we know that those people kind of exist, and that some of that is personality related. We also know that sometimes that can become pathological. I'm not saying it is pathological, but so for example, if you look at people who have borderline personality disorder, they oftentimes experience very intense emotions. So we do know that there are people who experience intense emotions. And we also know that with people with BPD, it takes a shorter time for them to ramp up their emotions, and they persist in high emotional states for longer periods of time. So let's say for a normal person, it'll take them like 5 minutes to feel emotional. The emotions will last for about half an hour. With someone with BPD, it'll take them less than 60 seconds, and it can persist for like 4 hours. I don't want to draw a direct opposite between alexithymia and BPD, because there could be some amount of emotional overlap there. I'm not sure. Right? It's a great question, and one that I would want to research a lot more before answering. But it's great. I love these questions. What if I only experience other people's emotions but have trouble with my own? I think you need to do some emotional work. Yeah, so I do think that people with alexithymia have more trouble with empathy. Yes. Would psychoanalysis call alexithymia repression? I'm not sure that psychoanalysis, I don't know what psychoanalysis, because there's different schools of psychoanalytic thought. One really interesting research thing, I don't know how well reproduced this statistic is, but I think I've seen a couple of studies that show that psychoanalytic psychotherapy is less effective in people who are alexithymic. Take it with a grain of salt, though. I just looked at one or two studies, and I thought it was kind of an interesting finding. Okay, shall we move on? We've got other stuff to cover. Okay. All right. Chat, so tired. So sleepy, chat. Okay. All right. Why am I sleepy? I don't know, man. Are y'all sleepy? How you just glass stay hydrated? I need to eat something, my dudes. I'm getting hungry. 5-minute break to close eyes. Seasons are changing. Yeah, that could be it. TBH. I've been watching a little bit more of the international than I should. That's probably one of the reasons I'm tired. By the way, just while I'm recuperating, do y'all have a recommendation for a particular Assassin's Creed game? Which, like, I was told that Black Flag is the best, but what do y'all think? Okay, people. Okay, so Black Flag for sure. Okay. I think I played 2 many years ago. I thought 2 was pretty good. Okay. And by the way, for those of y'all that have played Last of Us, the gameplay is quite hard, right? Okay, maybe I just... All right. And any suggestions between Deathloop and Returnal? Yeah, I'm playing I'm playing Last of Us on hard. Okay. Okay, so it seems like most of it is Returnal. Okay. Yeah, I started Returnal. It seemed pretty fun, but I wasn't sure if it's like... yeah, so when people are saying hard is hard for Last of Us, that's what I mean, I wanted a hard game, but I was just like, this seems really hard. Call to the Lamb stream. I don't know if we're going to do that again. We probably should, but I beat the game, by the way. Chat. I one-shotted the 3rd and 4th boss, and then the last guy was kind of hard. But if you guys have other suggestions, I'm down. I think like at some point the like if you get a decent build, it's just yeah, I played a fair amount of Hades. I just finished Bloodborne again. Or sorry, I finished it for the first time. So this I was also super surprised. So I played Elden Ring, went through withdrawal from Elden Ring, never beat Melania, by the way. Then I went back and I was like, I need more. I need more. more. And so then what I did is I reinstalled Bloodborne and played Bloodborne, got the church pick, and then like I couldn't beat the last boss in Bloodborne or the last bosses. I never even beat the first of the last bosses in Bloodborne. And then this time I one-shotted them both after Elden Ring. It was like Bloodborne with the church pick is easy. It was just because you could just like the church pick's poise damage is nuts, dude. Yeah, I think I beat Orphan. That felt harder though. Agreed that Bloodborne DLC is hard. I need to play Horizon. Sekiro was just too. I felt like it was too much like muscle memory training for a particular fight. So I kind of gave up on Sekiro. It just felt like I had to work. It felt like work, not play. Like I just had to train my reflexes to like beat bosses. Why don't I stream? Um, well, I mean, so the reason I stream is not to play, right? Like the purpose of our stream is to try to help people. So that's just, I mean, sometimes we'll stream games. I'm not saying we don't, but like, it's not. That's not why we do it, you know. But we do have some. So the cool thing is, it's more about. So when it comes to gaming streams, it's more about finding excuses to play games on stream than it is about just playing games. So we try to make at least some kind of like value out of it, and we've got some hopefully cool stuff coming soon, which will hopefully be lots of fun. We've got there's a bunch of cool stuff we can do. It just requires a lot more production and effort on my team's part, but we've got some stuff coming. Don't worry, chat. Okay. Um, let's get started. We've got one more post. And then... All right, let's talk about why do we make excuses? I make a lot of excuses and I don't understand responsibility. How do I stop? For my whole life, as far as I know, I've always thought of myself as a somewhat ordinary person. And I didn't think I would ever be a bad person at all. It wasn't until about a year ago that I made a Reddit post related to exercise where I did nothing but throw a pity party and make a lot of excuses. It wasn't until people pointed out that I do, in fact, make a ton of excuses that I kind of realized it. I still don't really get it. I still don't understand responsibility. In fact, I've always thought of mental illness as an excuse until the internet told me that it isn't. Why is that? Maybe I do understand, but I simply don't want to admit it. How do I change it? I'm curious what others think. Does this make me a bad, lesser person in their eyes? It feels even more bizarre when I've always considered myself decent, at least. So this is tricky because oftentimes we and other people will make excuses. But I don't know that we're ever really like taught or understand, okay, why do we make excuses? Like what's going on? How do we take responsibility? Because we'll be told, right? We'll hear from other people, oh, you're making an excuse. You should take more responsibility for your life. But what does that mean? I kind of think it sounds like, okay, you need to live up to your potential. You just need to live up to your potential or focus more. Where sometimes in life we're kind of given particular goals or we're given particular criticisms, but we're not really given a roadmap to fixing those criticisms. So we get criticized and sometimes we'll criticize ourselves. but we don't really know like how to fix the problem, right? How do I stop making excuses? Like it's so hard to figure out, right? So we're going to start this in kind of a weird way. We're going to lean a little bit on a clinical perspective. So I want to share with y'all a paper by Jim Groves, who's associate professor at Harvard Medical School and one of my favorite, I don't know that he was a mentor, but he taught me a lot, let's say that. And Jim wrote this paper called The Hateful Patient. And The Hateful Patient is a really fantastic article because it's one of the top 10 papers I've read in my life. And I think if all physicians should read this paper, in my opinion. So just to give you all a little bit of background about what's the hateful patient about. So the hateful patient is about patients that we hate as physicians. And it's interesting, right? Because we live, we have a job where we're supposed to take care of people. And it's our ethical duty to like try to treat sickness and not judge, which is totally fine. But the question is, do physicians sometimes hate patients? And it's really important to acknowledge that just because it's our ethical duty to help people doesn't mean that we have to like them. And doesn't mean that sometimes patients do things that make us really dislike them. And so what Jim Groves does in this article is he talks about 4 classes of patients and behaviors that they engage in that cause people to dislike them. And the really fascinating thing about this article is that these behaviors are not just about patients. We oftentimes will find that friends engage in a lot of these behaviors. Family members will engage in a lot of these behaviors. So I think it's honestly one of the top 10 papers I've ever read. So I want to read a little bit of this to you. So there's one class of the hateful patients called the manipulative help rejectors. So I think about these people as help seeking, help rejecting. So let's kind of go through what Dr. Groves says. They actually seem the opposite of entitled. They appear to feel that no regimen will help. Appearing almost smugly satisfied, they return again and again to the office or clinic to report that once again the regimen didn't work. Their pessimism and tenacious naysaying appear to increase in direct proportion to the physician's efforts and enthusiasm. So the harder the physician tries, the less it works. When one of their symptoms is relieved, another mysteriously appears in its place. Apparently, what is sought is not relief of symptoms. What is sought is an undivorceable marriage with an inexhaustible caregiver. So when we talk about the hateful patient, what Jim Groves is kind of touching on is that there are some people who will go and seek help over and over and over again and will kind of reject it. And if we go back to our post, it sounds like this person made a post about exercise in which they were presumably asking for help, and that may not be entirely fair. And then what they ended up doing is when people were asking, okay, why don't you exercise? Why don't you exercise? Why don't you exercise? They were making excuses. And we see these kinds of things maybe in our personal relationships or even on the internet where people will ask us for help or guidance and then we'll go on to make excuses or reject it, right? So my favorite example of this is anywhere where gaming discussion happens. So let's say someone makes a post. Hey, I play this game. This particular hero, champion, character is OP. How do I beat this hero? How do I beat this champion? How do I beat this character? They ask this question, right? Asking for people to give them answers. How do I beat this person? People give answers. And do they say, oh, wow, I never thought about that. That's awesome. Thank you so much for helping. No, they never say that. What they say is, that's not going to work because of this. 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 Have y'all ever seen those kinds of discussions where people are like, how do I beat this thing in a video game? People are like, here's how you do it. And they're like, no, that doesn't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. So this kind of dynamic is actually really, really common, where we'll sometimes seek help, but then we'll actually push it away. We can see this with friends, and sometimes we actually see it in ourselves. And the way that we see it in ourselves is we make excuses. So let's understand a little bit about what an excuse actually is. So by definition, an excuse is a reason to do something. An excuse is a reason that is not the actual reason, right? It's not the real reason. It's just a reason that we provide. So that's kind of the nature of an excuse. So let's say I'm late to work and someone says, okay, why are you late to work today? Instead of saying, I'm late to work because I left the house too late, and instead of leaving like early or even on time, I woke up late, I left late, and so I'm late. And then what happens is, as we're speeding, through intersections and stuff like that, we end up hitting a minor problem. We hit 3 red lights. And sometimes hitting red lights is a normal part of driving. But when people ask us, why are you late? What you come up with is, oh, I hit 3 red lights. So we make an excuse. So, oh yeah, sometimes let's say I'm in a relationship and I don't really like spending time with this person, friendship, romantic relationship, whatever. And so I don't invite them. And when they ask me hey, what's going on? I haven't heard from you recently. We'll give them an excuse. We'll say, yeah, okay, the reason that I didn't invite you was because I didn't think you'd like it. Right? So we offer a reason that is not the real reason, which is by definition what an excuse is. So the first thing to understand about an excuse is that there's some amount of falseness to it, right? That's the nature of an excuse. It's not really what we feel. So what goes on in ourselves and why do we make excuses? So in the event of, forget about interpersonal relationships, with myself, why do I make excuses? So the first thing to understand about excuses, or the first way to kind of dive into it, is if you didn't make the excuse, what would be the result of that, right? So if you didn't make an excuse for yourself, what would you conclude? So if the reason that I don't exercise is because I can't afford a gym membership, right? So people say, okay, why don't you exercise, Dr. K? I can't afford a gym membership. Well, why don't you just go jogging outside or do push-ups at home, or, do push-ups at home, do sit-ups, do body weight exercises, and go for a run, go for a jog, do yoga at home. There are so many different things that you could do. And so if we don't make that excuse, what would we end up doing? Or how would we end up feeling about ourselves? If we think about what the excuse does, it gives us a reason to not blame ourselves for a particular thing, right? Because then suddenly an excuse means that it's not my fault. So all excuses that we use absolve ourselves of some responsibility. That's why we make them. Oh, it's not my fault. Here is the reason. I can't afford a gym membership. That's why I don't exercise. It's not my fault. It's because of this external circumstance. So this is really, really subtle and actually quite devastating, because when we make excuses, what we're also doing is surrendering power, because we're sort of saying that the reason for some aspect of my life is out of my control. And when I say I can't afford a gym membership, what I end up doing is surrendering that power, removing myself from responsibility, right? But in the process, I am disempowering myself. But what do I gain from making an excuse? What I gain is that it's not my fault. I don't have to feel bad, right? I don't have to feel ashamed. I don't have to feel like a failure. So excuses are really, really important, because what they do is absolve us of responsibility. So when my boss asks me, why am I late today? I say, oh, it wasn't my fault. It was the red lights. The red lights made me late today. Now suddenly I can't be punished for it. And even when we make excuses for ourselves, what we end up doing is absolving ourselves of responsibility. We surrender our power, which is why we stay stuck, but it gives us something really, really important, which is that we don't have to blame ourselves. And it's hard to blame yourself. And sometimes, especially with all the toxic positivity floating around on the internet, what we actually want to do is we're taught to not blame ourselves. We're taught, okay, don't blame yourself. It's not your fault. Not your fault. Don't blame yourself. Don't blame yourself. Don't blame yourself. And what we're actually seeing across the globe, and there's scientific articles about this, is a rising culture of victimhood, where one of the ways that we kind of advance our own interests in life is by becoming victims. So this is something that's kind of interesting, because if 100 years ago, if you had an altercation at school, what people were told to do is figure out how to settle your differences on your own. But now what we're kind of taught to do is appeal to institutional authority. And if we appeal to institutional authority and we play the victim card, then suddenly that's actually like how we gain power. There are really interesting studies about the rise of the culture of victimhood in our society. And so when we make excuses, what we're sort of doing is absolving ourselves of responsibility. It's not our fault anymore. It can be psychologically very, very satisfying, right? Because then I don't have to feel bad about myself. And I shouldn't feel bad about myself, because I'm an amazing human being. The internet tells me so. I should love myself and be full of self-compassion. The challenge is that as we make excuses for ourselves in our own life, we protect ourselves from certain negative emotions, but we also surrender our power. So then the question becomes, okay, how do I take responsibility? And this is where things get a little bit subtle and a little bit tricky, because you're saying, okay, of course I want to take responsibility, right? That's the whole point, is I want to stop making excuses and I want to start taking responsibility for myself. So how do you start taking responsibility? So this is kind of tricky, but I think that most people who make excuses think about themselves in sort of an ideal way. So here's where I am, but I should work out, right? So I should be over here. But because I can't afford the gym membership, that's why I'm not over here. That's why I'm stuck over here. And this is the gap that I want to try to bridge anytime I make an excuse, right? So this is where I am. This is where I should be. An excuse prevents me from moving from point A to point B. So if you kind of think about it, where do you belong? Do you belong at point A or do you belong at point B if you make excuses for yourself? If you really think about it, where you actually belong is point B, right? That's where you should be. If not for the excuse, then you would be in point B. And the excuse is out of my control, so where I really belong is point B. There's an entitlement of point B. There's an entitlement to being over here instead of being over here. And let's tunnel down into that a little bit more. Remember that we said that part of the reason that we make excuses is to protect ourselves from the way we would feel about ourselves if we didn't make excuses. So if I didn't make excuses, and it was my fault that I'm overweight or underweight or at an unhealthy weight or not strong or physically deconditioned, if that was my fault, then I would feel bad about myself. So when I make an excuse, I'm sort of imagining that I should be here even though I'm here. And this is a shameful place to be, right? Because this is the good place to be. Exercising is good. And I don't want to be in this shameful place. So I'm going to feel entitled to this and I'm going to make an excuse to explain the gap. Therein lies the problem. So I want to ask y'all a question. Let's say I want to learn how to cook. I'm going to give y'all two options, right? So let's say that there's someone who says, yeah, I know how to cook. And the reason that my food doesn't come out good is because of this excuse, right? So let's say I make a pie and the pie doesn't taste good. Oh, it's not my fault. The oven is messed up. It's an excuse. And now I'm going to make a sandwich. Oh, it's not my fault that the sandwich is bad. The tomatoes were expired or the mustard had fungus in it, right? Like whatever. Not my fault. Not my fault. Make excuse, make excuse, make excuse. I'm a good cook, but that's the reason my food is bad, because of some kind of excuse. So will this person ever learn to cook? What do y'all think? Are they ever going to make good food? As long as you're making excuses, you're never going to learn how to cook. What should that person do if they want to take responsibility? What does that kind of mean, taking responsibility? The right way to learn how to cook is to say, hey, I actually don't know how to cook. I don't know how to cook. And now that I sort of admit to myself that I don't know how to cook, now I can start making progress, right? So if I assume that, okay, I don't know how to cook, let me learn. And the presumption is that I don't expect my pie to be good because I don't know how to cook. I don't expect my sandwiches to be good because I don't know how to cook. And that's okay, because once you kind of accept that, then you can start learning, right? Then you can start asking for help and actually receiving it. So what does that kind of mean from our excuse analogy? That means that the key thing here is that this is where we should be, this is where we are. And if you want to start taking responsibility, start with where you are. And this is what's really tricky, is try to be as non-judgmental as you can about it. Start to realize that if you don't exercise, instead of blaming yourself, start to think a little bit about, how were you raised? Did your parents prioritize exercise? Was it important to you? Did people support you in terms of exercising? If you feel ashamed of yourself, or are there people around you who will be like, hey, let's do it together? Because I certainly know a lot of people who exercise who started exercising because someone else got them into it. Either their parents prioritized it, or their friends prioritized it, or people even had workout buddies who were more into working out than they are, and they sort of smoothed the path for them. And so taking responsibility is, in a weird way, abandoning where you should be and really owning up to where you are. And then you don't need a reason to explain why you're not there, because that's not where you belong. The reason that's hard is because if we belong here, then there's a certain staticness of that, right? So if I'm overweight or underweight or an unhealthy weight, and that's where I belong, then that's where I kind of deserve to be. And there's something that's kind of almost like destined about that. There's something deterministic about it. And that's actually where we're a little bit incorrect. Because just like the person who doesn't know how to cook, if you admit to yourself, hey, I don't know how to cook, does that mean that that person will never learn how to cook? Absolutely not. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's the person who admits to themselves that I don't know how to cook who is the best position to become a good cook. Whereas it's the person who believes that they're a good cook and keeps on making excuses that will never be a good cook. And it's the same way for the other excuses that we make in our lives. If you beat yourself up or make excuses for not exercising, start by sort of admitting that it's okay to be where you are. And once we kind of admit where we are, then we can start to move forward. But as long as we make excuses for where we should be, we're not focusing on where we are because we're always looking over here and we're making excuses. But remember that excuses are outside of our control. So whether we ever get there depends on the stars aligning in our favor and luck. And so if you want to start taking responsibility in your life, start by sort of letting go of where you should be. And start by really thinking a little bit about what makes it hard for me to admit where I am now. Because chances are that comes with all kinds of bundles of emotions. And those are precisely the kinds of emotions that we're trying to avoid by making an excuse. But you ultimately have to kind of work through that and start with where you are. That's how you take responsibility. And once you sort of figure out where you are, you can come up with a reasonable plan to move forward. If you start to do that, then you will actually empower yourself as opposed to surrendering your power by making an excuse. So excuses are really, really tricky, right? We're very, very careful. You have to be really careful. It's very subtle. We'll sort of see people who make excuses that Jim Groves kind of found in The Hateful Patient. These are patients for whom nothing ever works because they always say something gets in the way, something gets in the way, something gets in the way. And we know people in our lives who do that, sometimes who are like, hey, how do I beat this OP strategy? And you're like, here's how you beat it. They're like, no, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And we're kind of doing that with ourselves, right? Because anytime there's an opportunity to move forward, we use an excuse instead to discard it. We reject that help, even from ourselves. We end up making an excuse and then we end up staying stuck. So instead of having an excuse for why you didn't achieve your goals, start with where you are. And then you don't even need an excuse, right? Because it's okay to be where you are. It's okay to start at the beginning. And once you accept that it's okay to start at the beginning, that's how you take responsibility. Questions? Okay. So a lot of good questions. Okay. If you tell this to someone directly, would it be damaging now but eye-opening for them eventually? I'm going to say no. So I'll share with y'all kind of like a perspective that I have, which is that anytime you think you want to convince someone of something, instead of convincing, you should seek to understand instead. So I think it's good. How can I say this? So like if we look at the person who made this post, people were pointing out to them the pattern of their using excuses. So I think it's fine to make an observation to your friends and say, hey, you've asked me for help 3 times, or you asked for help and I've offered 3 things and you've said none of those things will work. How do you understand the difference between me thinking they'll work and you thinking they won't work? Like how do you arrive at the conclusions that it won't work? Right? And then they'll give you a bunch of reasoning. And then you're going to ask them, well, how do you think that I arrive at the conclusions that they do work? Right? And then this is where you've got to be really careful because what they're going to say, you're different. It won't work for me. Which, by the way, that samskar is really powerful, and we have a whole video about it in the Guide to Motivation. Is this works for you, but it won't work for me. And so then the next question is, okay, tell me how you're different. Help me understand when you became different. How did you conclude who you are? Because that's devastating, right? Once you decide that what works for the rest of the world doesn't work for you, suddenly all of the solutions of the rest of the world won't be able to help you. And that's how you end up as a help rejecter, because it doesn't work for you. Now, are you unique? Sure. But are you so different from the other human beings that what works for most human beings doesn't work for you? Nope. But you started to believe that for some good reason, right? And so you have to get to that, and you have to actually dismantle the ego. And once you dismantle the ego, then they'll listen. The problem is, if you tell someone directly, it may be damaging, but never eye-opening, right? Whether it's eye-opening for them eventually or not depends on their humility and the way that you share it. So that's why I would avoid doing it, because the damaging part is likely. Or there's a way that you could do it, which is like, let's say we're talking about the hateful page. You can ask them to read it and say, hey, I was reading about this, and I know it sounds like kind of an insult, but like I was seeing our interactions in this situation, where sometimes you'll ask me for help, I'll give you an answer, and then it seems like you reject it. How do you understand that? What if it's not an excuse, but instead a legitimate roadblock? So that's where I think how you respond to other people really clues us in about whether it's a legitimate excuse or a roadblock. So if it's a roadblock, then other people's help and solutions should help you overcome it, right? But if the solutions don't solve the problem, or you keep on making excuses why their solutions won't work for your roadblock, then you have to be careful. So I see that actually a lot, where people will be like, oh, this is a legitimate problem. And someone is like, okay, well, then let me help you with this in this way. And then they're like, no, that won't work because of excuse 2B. And then excuse 3C. And then you get into this like nested tree of logic of excuses, excuses, excuses. So Biker JJ is asking a great question. How to avoid using your childhood as an excuse? So your childhood is a reason, but the question is, what is the responsibility from this day forward? So a lot of people will say, like, let's say you grew up with an unhealthy attachment style, where parents didn't teach you how to value your body or value your self-esteem or anything like that. Does that mean you're at a disadvantage? Absolutely. Does it mean you're screwed? Absolutely not. Does it mean that you can't do something today? Absolutely not. So you can blame your childhood for the hand of cards that you're dealt, but how you play those cards is your responsibility. And if you say, I have this crappy hand of cards, I cannot win at the game of life, I'm going to fold, that's using your childhood as an excuse. Ceasing to play the game is using the childhood as an excuse. Because the other nested layer of that is that the most devastating hand of cards that you can be dealt, the most devastating card is growing up in a situation where you are taught that your effort is meaningless. Do y'all see that? It's like almost a meta. It's like a card that says there's no point in playing the game. And so then you fold. But really, the most devastating thing I've seen is children who are taught that their efforts are useless, which can make you use your childhood as an excuse. But even that is drinking the Kool-Aid from your childhood. Because at the end of the day, like, I don't know how to say this, you control a lot in your life. You don't control your circumstances, but you control what you do. And it's people who do things consistently and over time that usually improve their lives. Okay. Um, yeah. So for people who are saying, I can never escape, don't trust that part of your mind, right? Don't trust it. I can't stick to anything. Notice the black and whiteness of that statement. Can you stick to not sticking to anything? Right? How do you know which part of your mind to trust? That's a great question. So here's how to understand whether your mind is functioning properly or not. Let's first understand the nature of three different elements of mind. One is emotions, ego, and intellect. So first thing is we have emotions. Emotions are reactions. We don't control them. They're like automatic, right? So if I see someone on the street, I don't control whether that person triggers happiness or triggers anger. That's not in my control. Second thing is the purpose of ego is to protect us from painful emotions. So for example, I don't want to feel ashamed if I ask someone out on a date and they reject me and I feel hurt, my ego will rise up and will devalue the other person. I'll start insulting them. And if I can devalue that person, it reduces how rejected I feel, right? Because like that person doesn't deserve this. And so then what happens is the ego then hijacks our analytic reasoning. And when it hijacks our analytic reasoning, then it starts coming up with justifications. So how do you trust whether your mind how do you trust your mind? How do you know whether your mind is operating correctly or incorrectly? It comes down to the two things, the presence of emotion and the presence of ego. So are you experiencing emotions? If the answer is yes, then we kind of know this, right? Because when someone is emotional, they don't think as clearly. But sometimes people are numb and they don't realize they're experiencing their emotions. So then we have to look at the actions of the ego. And that's where there are two things that the ego is doing. One is, are you making a comparison? If you are making a comparison, that is the result of ego. If you are making a comparison, you cannot trust what your logic says. Second thing is, are you pumping yourself up or devaluing someone else? If you are thinking critically of someone else, or you are thinking positively, like in an artificial kind of way, about yourself, if you're like, then chances are your intellect is hijacked. So that's kind of weird because people will say like, you know, well, how does thinking about yourself positively mean that it's your ego? Like, can't you be good at anything? Absolutely. But the people who are good at stuff, who are humble, you can be skilled and humble. You don't pump yourself up if you're skilled and humble, right? In fact, we have a word for that, which is humble. You can be awesome and still not pump yourself up. And you can acknowledge that you're good at something without being egotistical about it. So it's really about that pump. It's not about your actual skill. It's about what are you doing in your mind? Are you being like, yeah, I'm awesome. I'm better than everyone else. I'm so great. Everyone else is so bad. I'm so much smarter than everyone. That's ego. Then you can't trust whatever your mind is saying. So if ego or emotion are active, the intellect is less trustworthy. Aren't comparisons scientific? No. Comparisons are relative. Science is what is. Understand this very carefully. What is the acceleration due to the force of gravity on the moon? What is the acceleration of the force of gravity on the Earth? Those are two numbers. There's no comparison. There's no more or less. The more or less is what the human mind applies. I guarantee you, if human beings did not exist and no life existed, there would be no comparisons in the world. Would the force of gravity be different everywhere? Absolutely. Would there be bigger stars and smaller stars? Absolutely. But the comparison is created by the human mind. Y'all get that? The sun doesn't make a comparison with anything. The moon doesn't make a comparison. It's just a hunk of rock. It's not capable of making comparisons. Is it scientific? Does it exist? Absolutely. Do y'all get that? This is really important to understand. Science makes no comparisons. Humans make comparisons. Do y'all get that? Very important to understand. Salvatore Salgari saying seems wrong. I completely agree. It does seem wrong. It's kind of weird. Not gonna lie. Right? Is the force of gravity better or worse than the strong nuclear force? Is the strong nuclear force better or worse than the weak nuclear force? The nuclear forces don't give a crap. They just are what they are. Strong, there's just two nuclear forces. We're the ones that apply the word strong and the word weak. Right? That's us. Those nuclear forces were chilling long before we were around, and they're going to be chilling long after we're gone. Yeah, so Kites in the Sky has it right. They just exist. That's it. So Ubi Wooby Dooby is saying the ego is the enemy. I don't think it's the enemy. The ego is a part of us. The only time it's quote unquote the enemy is when we lose control of it. And even then, it's not the enemy. It's not like if I'm incontinent, it's not like my bladder is the enemy, right? Is it malfunctioning and not doing what it's supposed to? But it's not like stupid bladder. Let's get rid of the blood. No, like it's not the enemy. It's just, it's a part of our mind that is working out of our control. It's not the enemy. When is ego an ally? When you control it instead of it controlling you. It's a tool. Oh, ego is the enemy is a book. Makes sense. I can understand why someone would write that book. Because I think the ego causes a lot of problems when, when it's out of control. You think ego is your ally? I was born in it, molded by it? No, my friend. Elodin 0451. I would beg to disagree. I would say it was born in you. And it became molded. You weren't born in it. It's the other way around. Oh, is that from Batman? Cool. Oh, so it's from Bane? Makes perfect sense. That's great. You'll have to remember, y'all got to keep me updated on the memes, chat. How do I be more humble? Start by noticing that you're not humble. So here's how you be humble. You just notice that you're not. Because here's the thing, right? So people who are egotistical are so self-absorbed, they don't even realize they're self-absorbed, right? Yes, I have another new car today. And I flew first class, and I did this, and I did that, and I'm so wonderful. I'm so great. Right? That person they're not even aware of what they're doing. So the way to be humble is to recognize when you're being egotistical. So just notice, like, notice, because you'll see, like, your ego will fantasize. So here's like a good thing to catch yourself when you're fantasizing and be like, oh yeah, everyone's going to love me so much. I'm going to be inspiration. It's going to be great. Everyone's going to be so excited to see me. Just be like, wow, my ego's like really excited right now. Dr. K, help me find motivation to study neuroanatomy. Okay, here's what you need to do if you want motivation to study neuroanatomy. I know it sounds kind of weird. I don't know why you're studying neuroanatomy, but let's assume it's for a medical reason. If it's not, then I don't know how to help you. But thing to understand is that once you understand neuroanatomy, so many other things will fall into place. Like you can figure stuff out once you know the neuroanatomy. The neuroanatomy is the rules of the game. It's not the end. It's not the game. It's the rules of the game. I don't know if that kind of makes sense. But if you look at like, so for example, you know, if you're looking at like vertigo and people who have dizziness. And so then if you ask them to close their eyes and if they fall over, what's going on? They have a dorsal column problem, right? So if you look at neuroanatomy, if we look at our sense of balance comes from three things. It comes from our vestibular apparatus, which is in our ears. It comes from our eyes. And it comes from our dorsal columns. So if we want to understand dizziness, we have to understand all three of those. Right? And so like that's like neuroanatomy, like I think the key thing to remember is like, remember it's going to be functional at the end. And I didn't really understand, I mean, I memorized a bunch of it, but I didn't really understand it until I started really doing clinical work. And then you realize like, oh crap, you don't have to memorize these 1,000 diseases. So if you look at like strokes, for example, right? You don't have to memorize 10,000 stroke syndromes. Once you understand the neuroanatomy, you can extrapolate all of the strokes. That's why neurology is such a cool field, because it's essentially a puzzle. But in order to put the puzzle together, you need to understand neuroanatomy. Right? So if I have like a vertibular, posterior vertibular artery stroke, what's going to happen? If I have an anterior communicating artery stroke, what's going to happen? If I have an MCA stroke, what's going to happen? Right? Watashi no tomodachi is saying my girlfriend knows all the stroke syndromes. So that's really the purpose of neuroanatomy, is to like explain how things fit together. Right? So there's also like other random stuff. Like, did y'all know that dolphins have a far smaller or maybe even absent corpus callosum compared to human beings, which means that dolphins can sleep with one of their hemispheres at a time, whereas ours are connected. So they have like two separate brains that are not connected. So one shuts off while the other keeps going, whereas ours are connected through this thing called the corpus callosum. And so if we sever the corpus callosum, what happens? All kinds of weird left brain, right brain syndromes. Like, it's so bizarre. Like, I can see something, but I can't name it. Or it depends on the eye. So if I have a severed corpus callosum and I want to be able to name an object, it has to be with my right eye, right? So the ocular nerve, I think, decussates and goes across onto the other side. So it goes to my left brain, and then I can, like, name the object. So I can only name objects that I see with my right eye, but I can't name objects that I see with my left eye, which is wild. That may not actually be true. I'm rusty on that kind of stuff. But there's, you know, hemispheric strokes and stuff. You have severed corpus callosum. It's really wild. Neurology is awesome. Super wild. So how does that affect animals with eyes on either side of their head? It depends on how robust their corpus callosum is. And also whether the animal eyes work in the same way that ours do. Random question, but what is your experience with OTs in the mental health space? I think it's fantastic. I think it's really important to understand that OTs do a lot of critical stuff that doctors are never taught to. OTs are ballers. Occupational therapists. Sorry. How does learning a second language affect the brain? I don't think it affects the brain. I think you just learned a second language. So you just develop in your linguistic cortex different modes. There's all kinds of weird studies on like what you think in and what you dream in and how that changes. So generally speaking, your birth language or your first language is going to be what you dream or think in for most of your life. Occupational therapy isn't where you complain about your job. That's great. Brilliant. More folds in the brain equals smarter. Generally speaking, Rice Dude, I know it sounds kind of weird, but the answer to that question is yes. So as people like get into dementia and stuff, they lose surface area. And surface area is clutch, right? So why do we have folds? You all understand this? Okay. Why are folds in the brain good? Not what I planned on teaching today. We'll do this and then I got to run. But so the reason folds in the brain are good is because it enhances surface area. So let's imagine two objects. For a given volume, let's say I have a square. So I've got 4 surfaces. Now let's say that I create one fold in the same volume. Now I've got this membrane, this membrane, this membrane, this membrane, and I have a couple of extra membranes in here. So I can exchange stuff over here. And then if I have, right? Now I've got all these membranes over here, over here, over here. So surface areas is good for the brain. Now let's do this. Let's take a look at so this really shows volume loss, right? So this is a healthy brain. And this is a dementia brain. So you can see there's a volume loss over here. But what we probably want to do apparently there's I guess this is a meme. There's a smooth brain, wrinkly brain meme. That's hilarious. That's terrible. All right. I think that's how we know we've streamed for enough today. All right. So who are we rating, chat? Yeah, right? It looked like meat, actually. It was bizarre, huh? Should we raid House of the Dragon? Chat? What do y'all think? House of the Dragon? Your brain meats are tingling. Mountain Drew's with me. All right, y'all what we want to raid a Dota streamer for real? Hungxiety? Ghost of a Tale? Zentrea? Okay, we can raid Zentrea, sure. All right, let's raid Zentrea, and then we'll see y'all on Wednesday. All right? We can raid BSJ next time.